My sister and her husband cheated me out of my father's legacy. I chose revenge and won in court. The air inside the county courthouse was stiff and stale, the kind of silence that makes every shuffle of a shoe echo too loud. I walked in with my head up, my uniform long gone, but the posture still in my bones. My sister Sophia sat at the front table with her husband Jonathan. He leaned toward her, whispering something that made her smirk. She turned her head just enough to catch my eye, and that little grin said more than words ever could. She thought she'd already won. Jonathan looked at me like I was a joke, like this whole thing was a formality before they finally signed me out of my own life. I could hear the low chatter of people waiting for the judge. Lawyers adjusted their files, clerks tapped at their keyboards, and a few folks in the benches craned their necks to get a look at me. I wasn't the kind of person who blended in. Maybe it was the military, bearing. Maybe it was the fact that my family drama had made it into the local news already. Either way, I knew I was being watched. I didn't flinch. The bailiff called out, "All rise," and in walked Judge Marcus Ellison, robe pressed, expression neutral. He moved like he had seen it all before until he saw me. He froze mid-step, his hands still on the bench, his eyes locked on mine, and he muttered under his breath, not loud but clear enough for the room to hear, "It's her." That was it. The energy in the room shifted like someone cut the power. Lawyers stopped shuffling papers. Even Sophia's smirk slipped for a second. Jonathan looked around confused, as if he missed the inside joke. The silence wasn't polite. It was loaded, like everyone suddenly realized there was something here they didn't understand. I kept my face calm, but inside I felt the jolt. Recognition. He remembered me. I hadn't expected that. I had no idea if it would help me or hurt me, but it was something Jonathan and Sophia hadn't planned for. Judge Ellison straightened himself and cleared his throat like nothing happened. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Be seated." The courtroom obeyed, but the weight of his reaction lingered in the air. Sophia leaned closer to Jonathan, whispering fast, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her legal pad. Jonathan whispered back, his jaw tight. I didn't need to hear them. I could read their body language the way I used to read a tactical map. They were rattled, even if they didn't want to show it. I sat at my table, my attorney flipping through folders, whispering that we'd stick to the plan. But my mind wasn't on the notes. My eyes kept drifting back to the judge, who avoided looking at me directly now, but every once in a while I caught him stealing a glance like he was replaying something in his head. The clerk started reading the case information, a dull voice filling the silence. Matthews versus Matthews, case number. The sound of my last name bouncing around the room was heavier than it should have been. I could see the people in the benches whispering to each other. Family versus family always draws a crowd. People love a good train wreck, especially when it's about money, property, and bloodlines. Sophia's lawyer stood first, smooth voice rehearsed, telling the court that this was a matter of responsibility, that my mental state after military service left me unfit to manage our late father's estate. The words slid out clean, professional, like he'd said them 100 times before. I sat still. I had been briefed on what they would say, but hearing it out loud in a courtroom made it sharper. Jonathan nodded along, arms folded, doing his best impression of a concerned son-in-law. He looked proud of himself, like this was his show. Sophia kept her eyes forward, but every so often she shot me a glance, and I knew she was drinking in the sight of me, sitting there, accused of being unstable, unfit. She always wanted to be the strong one, the responsible one. For her, this was vindication. When it was our turn, my attorney stood and calmly laid out that we would be presenting evidence that not only disproved their claims, but also revealed their attempts at fraud. He didn't get into details yet. This was just the opening, but the words landed. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Sophia shifted in her chair. And then, it happened again. Judge Ellison leaned back, eyes on me like he was weighing something much bigger than a property dispute. His stare wasn't hostile, but it wasn't casual either. It was the look of a man who had a memory clawing its way back. He blinked, adjusted his glasses, and forced himself to look down at his notes. I kept my breathing even. I had been trained for pressure, for situations where a single slip could cost lives. A courtroom wasn't a battlefield, but the stakes felt just as real. This wasn't just about a house. It was about my father's legacy, my name, and the truth of who I was. I could sense the tension building. The people in the gallery leaned forward, catching every word, every movement. They didn't know the backstory. They didn't know the years of rivalry between me and Sophia, the way Jonathan had slithered into our family, or the secrets my father had left behind. All they saw was a woman in her 30s, former military, being painted as broken while her polished sister and smug brother-in-law tried to take control. It was the kind of setup that made for easy judgment. But the judge knew something they didn't, and that changed everything. The hearing pressed on, but the shadow of that first moment stretched over every sentence, every glance, every pause. Jonathan's confidence started to crack. Sophia's rehearsed calm began to look forced, and I sat steady, waiting, knowing the real fight was only just beginning. I clenched the edge of the table and loosened my grip when the judge finally looked down, acting like nothing had happened. The gavel echoed, but my thoughts were already pulling me backward to the weeks before this courtroom became my battlefield. The mornings had been simple back then. Coffee in the same chipped mug, a short run through the neighborhood, neighbors waving as they watered their lawns or loaded kids into minivans. I lived in the house my father left, the one with a porch that creaked when you stepped on the left side, the one that held every picture, every memory that mattered. For the first time since leaving the service, I thought maybe peace was possible. That peace lasted until Sophia started calling more often. At first it was casual checking in, asking how I was adjusting if I needed anything. Then the tone shifted. She talked about how keeping up the house was a lot for one person, how it would make sense to sell. Jonathan's name always slipped into the conversation like he was the one feeding her the lines. When I brushed her off, she showed up at the house. I hadn't seen her in months. And there she was, standing on the porch with Jonathan's arm draped around her like he owned the place already. She looked polished as always, hair perfect, outfit matched, the scent of expensive perfume trailing behind her. Jonathan gave me that tight smile the kind men wear when they're trying to act polite but already think they've won. Inside, we sat at the kitchen table. Sophia circled the subject like a lawyer, but Jonathan went straight for it. He leaned forward, fingers tapping against the wood, and said, "It's time to be practical. You can't take care of this place forever. You should let us handle it." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the idea of him handling anything was absurd. I knew his track record, failed ventures, unpaid debts, the way he clung to Sophia's career because his own couldn't stand on its own. Sophia frowned like my reaction embarrassed her. "Linda, you don't have to be stubborn about this. Dad would want us both to benefit." That was Rich. Dad had been clear his whole life. Integrity over convenience, loyalty over greed. He never trusted Jonathan, and I knew it. Sophia did too, even if she pretended otherwise. I stood, poured myself more coffee, and asked, "Are you here because you care about me or because you've run out of money again?" Jonathan's smirk faltered for half a second before snapping back in place. Sophia's cheeks flushed and she reached for her bag, pulling out papers. She slid them across the table like some kind of peace offering. "This is a fair division," she said. "I didn't touch them. You brought a contract to my kitchen. That tells me everything I need to know." "Of course." The tension thickened until Jonathan leaned back and spread his hands like he was the reasonable one. "Look, you've been through a lot. You don't need this burden. Let us help you." That word burden lit a fuse. I wasn't a burden when I deployed 3 times. I wasn't a burden when I came home with a back held together by steel and months of physical therapy. I wasn't a burden when Dad leaned on me in his last years. But now, suddenly, because I wasn't dancing to Jonathan's tune, I was a problem to be solved. "I told them to leave." Sophia stood slowly, gathering the papers with a snap, muttering about how difficult I was, how Dad would be disappointed. Jonathan kissed her cheek in some exaggerated show of unity, then winked at me on his way out. After the door shut, I stood in the living room staring at the photographs lining the mantel. Dad in uniform, me in mine, Sophia in her graduation gown. The contrast hit me. 2 paths, same family, and now those paths had crashed straight into each other. The calls didn't stop, they just got nastier. Sophia accused me of clinging to the past. Jonathan accused me of hiding assets. They wanted control and they weren't going to quit until they got it. I started keeping notes, dates, times, every word they said. It wasn't paranoia, it was training. The Army drilled into me that you prepare for conflict before it comes. You don't wait until the shooting starts to load your weapon. One afternoon, while I was patching a loose step on the porch, Dorothy, my neighbor, walked over. She had lived down the street longer than I'd been alive. She didn't mince words. "Those 2 think they're slick," she said, squinting toward the driveway where Sophia's car had just pulled away. "Don't let them push you out. your dad would roll over in his grave." I gave her a tight smile. "I don't plan on going anywhere." Then her eyes softened. "Good, but keep your guard up. Jonathan's the kind who plays dirty." She wasn't wrong. A week later, I came home to find an appraiser walking around the yard with Jonathan. He waved a paper at me, claiming it was routine, just business, nothing to worry about. I didn't sign anything. I didn't even let him step inside. But I knew then that this wasn't just talk anymore. They were moving. At night, lying in the quiet house, I thought about how fast normal life had collapsed. 1 minute, I was fixing my porch, drinking coffee, trying to find a rhythm outside the military. The next, I was staring down my own sister in what was quickly becoming a war over blood, property, and pride. I remembered Dad's voice, calm but firm, telling me that family loyalty only meant something if it wasn't for sale. I believed that. I still do. But looking at Sophia now, I wasn't sure she did. I kept the house locked tight, started storing important documents in a fireproof safe. If they wanted to push me, I was ready. I had no idea just how far they'd go, but I could feel the storm building. And when the storm hit, I wasn't planning on being the one caught off guard. The smell of roast chicken filled the kitchen, garlic and rosemary seeping into the air while I set the table with the same worn dishes Dad used to insist on for Sunday meals. I thought if anything could break through Sophia's walls, it would be this. Something familiar, something tied to home. I placed the silverware straight, poured wine into glasses, and forced myself to believe for one night we could sit down like family. When the doorbell rang, I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it to see Sophia standing there in a sleek black coat. Jonathan right behind her with that smug expression like he already owned the place. Sophia gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Smells nice," she said, stepping inside without waiting for me to invite her. Jonathan brushed past me, sniffing the air. "Wow, real food. Haven't had that in a while." He laughed like he expected me to join in. I didn't. We sat down, plates full, glasses clinking. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. Sophia asked about my work, about whether I'd thought of going back to school. I answered politely, even cracked a small joke about how I'd never get used to civilian paperwork compared to military forms. She chuckled. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe this was going to work. But halfway through the meal, Jonathan cleared his throat, folded his napkin, and leaned forward. "Linda, we should talk about the house." I kept my fork in my hand, staring at him. "We already did." Sophia put down her glass. "Linda, don't start. We came here to settle this like adults." "Adults don't ambush their sister at dinner," I said, my tone flat. Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table toward me, right on top of the placemat Dad used every Sunday. "These are the final papers. You sign. Everything's clean. You'll even get a payout. No stress, no hassle. I didn't touch it. You brought contracts to my table. You've got some nerve." Sophia's voice sharpened. "Stop being dramatic. This isn't about nerve. It's about being realistic. You can't keep this place forever. It's falling apart. You're alone. What's the point?" My chest tightened, but not from her words. It was the coldness in her tone. She sounded like a lawyer in court, not a sister at dinner. "The point," I said, setting my fork down carefully, "is that this was Dad's house. He wanted it kept in the family. He trusted me to do that." Jonathan snorted. "Trusted you? Come on. You've been back, 2 years? You think surviving the army makes you some kind of expert at running property? You're barely holding yourself together." That hit hard, but I didn't let it show. I stared at him until he shifted in his chair. "Say that again," I said quietly. He smirked, but Sophia put a hand on his arm, trying to reel him in. "Linda, no one's attacking you. We just think—" I cut her off. "No, you don't think. Jonathan thinks and you repeat it. You used to have a mind of your own, Sophia. What happened?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "What happened is that I grew up. You're the one stuck in the past." The table felt colder, the air heavier. Jonathan pushed the folder closer. "Sign the damn papers, Linda. Make it easy on yourself." I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms. "I don't do easy. Not for you." Silence stretched. Sophia's face hardened. Jonathan's jaw clenched. The chicken sat half-eaten, forgotten. I felt Dad's presence in that room, not as some ghostly figure, but as the memory of every lesson he drilled into us. Discipline, honesty, loyalty. Jonathan didn't belong to those values, and Sophia had traded them away. Sophia finally stood, snatching the folder off the table. "You're impossible," she hissed. "You've always been impossible. Dad might have been blind to it, but I'm not. You're unstable, and everyone knows it. Jonathan's right. We'll go through the courts, then you'll have no choice." She stormed toward the door, Jonathan following, smug again now that she was fired up. At the threshold, he turned back and gave me that wink I hated, the one that said he thought he was smarter than everyone else. "See you in court, Captain," he said. The door shut, the sound echoing in the hallway. I stood there in the quiet house, the smell of food turning sour in my stomach, the plates still full, the wine untouched, the meal ruined. I picked up the folder they'd left behind on the chair. Empty inside, just a power move meant to shake me to see if I'd bend. I carried it to the trash can and dropped it in, then poured the wine down the sink. My hands were steady, but my mind was already shifting gears. They wanted a war. They were going to get one, but not the way they expected. The night stretched long, and I walked the halls of the house, pausing at every photo, every mark on the walls from years gone by. Sophia had forgotten what this place meant. Or maybe she never cared. But I did, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me. As I shut off the lights, the silence felt heavier than usual, but not because I was scared, because I knew I had just crossed a line with them, and once you cross it, there's no going back. The next morning, the sound of tires crunching on the driveway pulled me out of a restless sleep. I looked out the window to see a gray sedan parked crookedly by the front steps. A man in a cheap suit climbed out, carrying a clipboard and measuring tape. Behind him came Jonathan, holding a coffee cup like he was already the landlord. I stepped onto the porch before they reached the door. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice flat. The man gave me a polite nod. "I'm here for the appraisal. Mr. Hayes said you were expecting me." "Funny," I said, folding my arms, "because I wasn't." "And for?" Jonathan smirked. "Linda, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just routine. We'll get a fair market value. Put this place on the market and you'll be better off for it. Better off by having strangers walk through my house uninvited." I stepped aside just enough to block the doorway. The appraiser shifted uncomfortably. "Look, ma'am, I'm just here to do my job." Jonathan pushed past me like he owned the place. "Go ahead, start with the living room," he told the man. I followed them inside, my hands clenched at my sides. The appraiser tapped walls, scribbled notes, and rattled off judgments like he was reading from a script. Outdated wiring. Kitchen needs a complete remodel. Roof replacement in the next year. This place will need serious investment. I bit my tongue, but when he dismissed the hardwood floor Dad had refinished by hand as damaged, I couldn't hold it anymore. That floor has held up longer than most marriages. It doesn't need replacing. It needs respect. The appraiser didn't even look at me, just kept jotting notes. Jonathan trailed behind him, nodding like every word was gospel. By the time they reached the dining room, my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, had come to the back door with a basket of muffins. She froze when she saw the stranger poking at the ceiling. "Linda, what's going on?" Jonathan jumped in before I could answer. "Family business, ma'am. Linda's moving to a retirement community. We're just getting the house ready." I shot him a look that could have cut steel. "That's not true, and you know it." Mrs. Thompson frowned, looking from me to him. "If you need anything, Linda, you call me," she said firmly, then pressed the basket into my hands before leaving. When the appraiser finally finished, Jonathan pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it onto the table like he was closing a deal. "Here's the paperwork. It's all ready. Just sign and you'll be set. End of 4. I flipped it open, scanning the pages. Legal jargon filled the lines, but the bold header hit me like a punch. Transfer of ownership, permanent and irrevocable. I looked up slowly. "You think I'm stupid enough to sign this?" Jonathan leaned back, unbothered. "I think you're tired, and tired people make smart choices when someone helps them." I slammed the folder shut. "You forged half these signatures. This isn't legal. It's fraud." "Hi, Sophia," who had slipped in quietly while I was distracted, finally spoke. "Linda, stop being paranoid. We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help you transition." Transition into what? Being stripped of everything Dad left behind. Living in a room someone else picked out. Eating food off a cafeteria tray while you cash in. Her face hardened. "You're making this ugly. It doesn't have to be." Jonathan slid the folder closer again. "Sign it now, or the next step is filing for mental incompetence. And believe me, we've got witnesses ready to testify. Neighbors saw you fall in the yard. You forget things. The army left its scars, didn't it?" My chest burned, but I forced myself to stay calm. "The army gave me strength, and if you try to paint me as unstable, I'll bury you both in court." Sophia's voice wavered just enough to show she wasn't as sure as she pretended. "Linda, please don't make this harder than it has to be." I stood, pushing the folder back across the table. "Get out, both of you. This is my house, and the only thing harder than keeping it will be watching you try to take it." Jonathan's mask cracked, his voice rising. "You're making a mistake." I walked to the door and held it open. "No, I'm making a stand." They left. Jonathan muttering curses under his breath, Sophia avoiding my eyes. The appraiser gave me an apologetic shrug before following them out. As the door closed, I locked it and leaned against it, heart pounding. My hands shook, but not from fear, from anger. They thought they could intimidate me with fake documents and legal threats. They didn't realize I'd spent years leading soldiers through chaos worse than this. I carried the folder to my desk, flipped it open again, and studied the sloppy forgery. Jonathan had underestimated me. He thought the army left me broken. What it really left me was trained to see lies, to spot patterns, to fight back without flinching. For hours I combed through the documents, circling inconsistencies, flagging errors. My military brain clicked into gear, turning fury into focus. By the time I was done, I had a stack of evidence proving just how far they were willing to go. The night air grew cooler. The house quiet again. I sat in Dad's old chair, the papers spread around me like a battle plan. They thought they'd walked me into a trap. What they didn't know was that they just handed me the ammunition I needed. I woke up before dawn, the same way I had during deployment, body alert even before my mind caught up. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were anything but. Their threats about declaring me incompetent rattled in my chest, not because I believed them, but because I knew they were bold enough to try. I needed to remind myself who I was before they started chiseling away at it. I laced up my running shoes and hit the road. The streets were still dark, a thin layer of fog hanging over the pavement. Each step hit the ground with a rhythm that pulled me back to Fort Benning, to endless miles of road runs with a rucksack cutting into my shoulders. Back then, I'd thought nothing could break me. I had pushed through blisters, heat, and exhaustion because the alternative was failing the people counting on me. That memory steadied me now. By the time the sun broke through, I was drenched in sweat, lungs burning in the best way. I slowed to a walk, looking at the neighborhood, waking up, sprinklers hissing, kids waiting for school buses. I thought about the life I'd carved out after the army. Small, quiet, predictable, but it was still mine. And I wasn't about to let my own sister and her husband strip it away like some spoils of war. When I got back, I showered and pulled out the old footlocker I'd kept tucked in the closet. Inside were scraps of a life most people didn't know about. Deployment patches, commendation medals, and a photo of me standing with my unit after we'd pulled survivors from a collapsed building in New Orleans during Katrina. My fingers lingered on the photo. That was where I'd first met Marcus Ellison, then just a young captain in the National Guard, scared out of his mind but refusing to quit. I'd dragged him out of a flooded street when he'd gone in too far. He'd promised he owed me one. I never thought that day would come back around. I shoved the memory down, packed the photo away, and pulled out something more practical. The discipline that kept me alive back then. I made a list, neat and organized, like prepping for an op. Confirm forgery with legal counsel, track Jonathan's financial exposure, re-examine Dad's records, contact reliable allies. The last part stuck with me. Allies. I'd been so used to doing things on my own since getting out, I'd forgotten the first rule drilled into us. No one fights alone. That afternoon, I went through Dad's old desk again. I had already found bills and yellowed envelopes, but I dug deeper. In the bottom drawer, taped beneath a false panel, I found a small locked box, the kind of thing Dad would have thought clever, but obvious to anyone who knew how he worked. After rummaging through his bookshelves, I found the key tucked in a copy of The Art of War. Typical Dad. Inside the box was a thick envelope with my name on it, written in his familiar scrawl. My hands shook as I opened it. What I found made me sit down hard. It wasn't just his will, though that was there, updated just months before he died. It was a trust agreement, clear, airtight, with me listed as trustee. The terms were blunt. The house, the savings, and several investments Dad had made over decades were not to be sold, transferred, or seized. They were safeguarded for me to manage and use responsibly, and if anyone challenged it, the courts would uphold it because of the way it was structured. There was also a letter, Dad's handwriting, again, shaky, but strong enough. Linda, you've carried weight most people never could. I saw it in your service, in your return, and in the way you protect what matters. Sophia has always struggled. Always let others steer her. I hoped she'd find strength on her own. But if she doesn't, don't let her weakness destroy what I built. This house is yours to protect, not just for you, but for what it represents. Don't let anyone take that away. Love, Dad. I sat there, the paper trembling in my hands, fighting the sting in my eyes. He had seen it coming. He had known Sophia might be swayed, and Jonathan would circle like a shark, and he trusted me, not her, to hold the line. By evening, I had already copied the documents and called a lawyer I trusted from my military days, Captain Jameson, now retired and working in estate law. When I explained the situation, he didn't laugh or dismiss me. He listened. "Bring the papers in," he said. "We'll shut this down fast, but brace yourself. They'll fight dirty before they give up." Dirty I could handle. I'd seen worse. That night, I cooked a simple dinner, sat at the kitchen table with Dad's letter beside me, and felt the shift inside me. Yesterday, I was reacting to their attacks. Today, I was building a counteroffensive. They wanted to paint me as fragile. They'd soon learn how wrong they were. As I cleaned the dishes, the phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "We'll give you one last chance to do this the easy way. Think carefully, Linda." I read it twice, then deleted it. No reply. Not because I didn't have words, but because silence was louder. I checked the locks, walked through the house one last time, and paused in front of Dad's photo hanging in the hallway. "I won't let you down," I whispered. Upstairs, sleep didn't come easy, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't fear keeping me awake. It was resolve. Morning light streamed through the blinds as I spread the documents across the dining table, each page stacked with precision like a mission briefing. The trust agreement was watertight. Dad hadn't just left me the house, he'd left me a fortress of legal protection. Jonathan could bring in 100 appraisers and a dozen lawyers, but without breaking federal law, he couldn't touch it. I took a slow sip of coffee and reread Dad's letter. His words carried the weight of someone who had lived long enough to see patterns and make hard choices. He had trusted me to be the one who stood guard. Not Sophia, not Jonathan, me. That gave me clarity, but it also gave me sadness. I wondered if Dad had known just how fractured things would become, if he'd seen Sophia's bitterness building over the years and knew it would come to this. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a small wooden box on the mantel, right next to his flag from the army and the medals he'd never bragged about. The day moved forward in small, deliberate actions. I scanned the trust and stored copies on a secure drive. Then I took the originals and tucked them into a fireproof lockbox. I'd learned long ago that preparation beats reaction every single time. By late afternoon, I drove into town to meet Captain Jameson, now simply Tom, at his law office. Though he still had the posture of a man who never fully left the service, he greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes that immediately zeroed in on the documents I carried. "Let's see what we've got," he said, clearing a space on his desk. As he read, I sat silently, watching him nod, occasionally raising an eyebrow, then making small marks in the margins. After 20 minutes, he leaned back. "Linda, this is ironclad. Your father knew exactly what he was doing. If Jonathan tries to push this in court, he'll get laughed out of the room. And if they forge more documents, well, that just adds criminal charges to their list." Relief mixed with determination. "So, what's the play?" He tapped the desk. "We don't wait. We file notice of the trust with the court preemptively. That way, if they bring anything, the judge already has a full picture. We also get a handwriting expert to certify your father's signature and make it indisputable." "And Sophia?" I asked quietly. His expression softened. "She's family. That complicates things. But the law doesn't care about family drama. It cares about facts. Right now, the facts are on your side." And I nodded, tucking away the sting of hearing my sister's betrayal reduced to paperwork. On the drive back, I thought about how far Sophia and I had drifted. We'd been close once, sharing a room, swapping secrets, whispering about boys we liked when we were kids. She'd always envied how Dad leaned on me more, how he trusted me with the hard jobs around the house. Maybe that envy had never gone away, only hardened into resentment. When I pulled into the driveway, a flash of movement caught my eye. Sophia's car was parked across the street. She was leaning against it, arms crossed, eyes sharp. I got out slowly, locking the door behind me. "What do you want, Sophia?" She didn't waste time. "I know about the trust." My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice steady. "Then, Dad made his decision." Her jaw tightened. "He always favored you, even in the end. Do you know how humiliating it is to realize your own father didn't trust you with anything?" I stepped closer, lowering my tone. He didn't trust Jonathan, and he saw you were letting him control you. This isn't about me being favored, it's about Dad protecting the family from a mistake. Her eyes flashed. You don't get to call my marriage a mistake, then stop proving me right. I shot back. For a moment, silence hung between us, thick and heavy. I thought I saw her eyes soften, just a flicker of the sister I once knew. But then Jonathan's truck pulled up and that softness vanished. She straightened, lips pressed tight. Jonathan leaned out the window. Everything good over here? Sophia didn't answer. She slid into her car, slammed the door, and followed him down the road. I stood there watching them disappear, knowing the trust had shifted the battleground. They'd fight harder now, but they'd also fight dirtier. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch with Dad's letter again, reading it slowly. His words weren't just instructions, they were a warning. He'd known Sophia might not choose me, he'd known Jonathan's ambition would swallow him whole, and he'd known the only way to secure the family's legacy was to give it to the one person trained not to break under pressure. I tucked the letter back into the box, lit a single lamp, and opened my notebook. The page filled quickly with notes. Jonathan's gambling habits, Sophia's contradictions, every slip they'd made so far. It wasn't bitterness driving my pen, it was strategy. The military had taught me something Jonathan never understood. Battles aren't won in noise and bluster, they're won in preparation, in patience, in knowing your enemy better than they know themselves. And if my own sister insisted on standing with the enemy, then I'd treat her no differently. When the clock struck midnight, I closed the notebook, stacked the trust papers neatly, and turned off the light. The house creaked around me, solid and unmoving, just as Dad intended. The next week started with a phone call from Jonathan's lawyer. He rattled off demands, deadlines, and threats like he was reading a grocery list. I let him finish before calmly telling him that my counsel had already filed notice of the trust. His pause on the other end of the line told me everything. He hadn't known. Jonathan hadn't told him. I almost smiled as I hung up. 2 hours later, Sophia showed up at my doorstep. No, Jonathan, just her. She looked tired, hair pulled back too tight, dark circles under her eyes. I opened the door but didn't step aside. Linda, she said flatly, we need to talk. You mean you need me to listen? I replied. Still, I moved enough to let her in. She walked past me, her heels clicking against the hardwood, and stopped in the dining room where the trust papers had once been spread. So, it's true. Dad left you in charge of everything. I leaned against the doorframe. It wasn't about playing favorites, Sophia. He wanted to protect the family from Jonathan. She turned, eyes flashing. Don't you dare blame this on him. You've been undermining me since we were kids. Dad always handed you the tough jobs, the responsibility, the trust. I was just the one in the background. That's not true, I said, voice sharp. You could have stepped up, but every time things got hard, you looked for someone else to lean on. First it was Mom, then Dad, now Jonathan. Her shoulders stiffened. You don't know what it's like to be me. Maybe not, I admitted, but I know what it's like to be under pressure. And Dad knew too. That's why he set it up this way. She slammed her hand against the table. Or maybe he just never believed in me. Maybe he thought I wasn't worth the risk. The anger in her voice cracked, and beneath it, I heard something worse. Hurt. I took a step closer. Sophia, this isn't about worth. This is about responsibility. And you let Jonathan convince you that stealing from me would somehow make you stronger. Her lip trembled, but she lifted her chin. He's my husband. I have to stand by him. Even if it ruins you, I asked. She didn't answer, just wrapped her arms around herself and turned toward the window. The silence stretched until I finally spoke. You don't have to be my enemy. You still have a choice. Her laugh was bitter. A choice with what? Jonathan's already in deep. You think I can walk away now? You can, I said firmly. And if you don't, you'll drown with him. The sound of an engine outside cut our conversation short. Jonathan's truck pulled up, and within seconds he was through the door, eyes narrowing as he spotted Sophia standing near me. What the hell is this? He demanded. Sophia stiffened but didn't move. We're talking about what? How she's screwing us over with that trust. Don't waste your breath. She's not budging. He turned to me, sneering. You think you've won because of some papers? This isn't over. I stepped closer, closing the space between us. You're right, it isn't over because now it's not just me you're fighting, it's the law. Every document you forged, every lie you told, it's all evidence. He laughed, but it was hollow. You don't scare me, Captain. Courts take years. Meanwhile, you'll be the one drowning in bills and stress. Funny, I said, because my lawyers seem to think you're the one who should be worried. Want to know what he called you? Amateur. His jaw clenched. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, torn between us. Jonathan turned to her. Why are you even here? Whose side are you on? Her eyes flicked to me, then back to him. I just wanted answers. And did you get them? His voice dripped with accusation. She didn't answer, and that silence said more than any words. Jonathan grabbed her arm, but I stepped between them before he could pull her. My voice was cold steel. Touch her again and you'll regret it. He let go, smirking. There's the soldier. Thought you left that behind. End quote. I never leave behind what keeps me standing. I shot back. The tension was thick, the kind that could snap into violence in a heartbeat. Sophia finally broke it by pulling away from both of us. Stop, both of you. I can't do this right now. She rushed past Jonathan out the door and into her car. The sound of her tires squealing down the street echoed like a gunshot. Jonathan glared at me, but his bravado was slipping. She'll come around. She always does. I stared at him, unflinching. Not this time. He left without another word, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I stood there breathing hard, the house vibrating with the echoes of our clash. The confrontation had torn away any illusion of civility. Sophia's loyalty was cracking, and Jonathan knew it. That made him dangerous. But it also meant the ground beneath him was starting to shift. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank slowly. My hands were steady, but my mind was running. Dad had trusted me to protect the family, and now that responsibility meant not just defending the house, but saving what little was left of my sister before Jonathan destroyed her completely. The sun dipped low outside, painting the walls in gold. I sat at the table where Sophia had yelled, where Jonathan had threatened, and where Dad once told us that family was both a shield and a weapon. For the first time, I understood exactly what he meant. The courthouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper, the kind of sterile scent that does nothing to ease nerves. I walked through the double doors with my attorney beside me, shoulders squared, uniform long gone, but discipline intact. Across the aisle, Sophia sat stiff in a tailored navy dress, Jonathan leaning close to whisper in her ear. His smirk was back, the one that always said he thought he had the upper hand. The bailiff called order, and the hum of conversation fell to silence. The judge entered, and for a brief second his eyes flicked toward me. I caught it, the same recognition that had cracked the courtroom open the first time we stood here. But today, his face was carved into neutrality. Sophia's lawyer stood first, smooth and practiced, painting a picture of me as fragile, erratic, and unfit. He used words like instability and post-traumatic stress, letting them hang heavy in the air. He even brought up a fender bender I'd had 6 months earlier, spinning it as proof I couldn't manage responsibility. Jonathan sat forward, nodding along, the perfect image of the concerned in-law. He whispered to Sophia, and she kept her eyes locked straight ahead, hands clenched together in her lap. When it was our turn, my attorney rose calmly, laying out the trust, the signatures, the notarized confirmations. He reminded the court that estate planning wasn't about who whined the loudest, but about what the law recognized. And the law, he said firmly, recognized me. Jonathan couldn't hold back. He barked out, "She's not well. Everyone knows it." The judge snapped his gavel, warning him to stay silent unless spoken to. The smirk faltered. Then they brought in their so-called expert, a doctor who claimed to have evaluated me. He read from a report about my supposed trauma, painting me as a ticking time bomb. But when my attorney cross-examined him, the cracks appeared. The man admitted he'd never met me in person. His evaluation was based entirely on second-hand notes provided by Jonathan. The judge's eyes narrowed at that, and a murmur rippled through the gallery. I sat still, every muscle tight but controlled. It was a strange battlefield. No gunfire, no explosions, just words meant to cut as deep as shrapnel. But the discipline was the same. Stay calm, watch for openings, and strike only when it mattered. When the hearing recessed for lunch, Sophia caught my arm in the hallway. Her grip was tight, desperate. "Linda, please don't drag this out. Sign the papers. Make it easier." I pulled my arm free. Easier for who? For Jonathan, so he can bleed you dry, or for you, so you don't have to face that Dad didn't trust you. Her face twisted, torn between anger and guilt. She turned on her heel and walked away before I could say more. Back inside, the afternoon session dragged on. Jonathan's lawyer tried to introduce more evidence, bank statements doctored to look like I had been reckless with Dad's money, but the forensic accountant my attorney had lined up dismantled them piece by piece, pointing out forged signatures and mismatched dates. Each revelation tightened the noose around Jonathan's credibility. By the time court adjourned, Sophia's mask was cracking. She gathered her purse with shaking hands, eyes glassy as she followed Jonathan out. He muttered furiously under his breath, his composure slipping for the first time. I stayed seated until the room emptied, then let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The war had officially started, and while the first shots had been fired, the real battle was still ahead. As I stepped outside into the fading afternoon light, my attorney clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good in there, better than most." I shook my head. This wasn't about me doing good. This was about them showing their hand, and they just did. The courthouse loomed behind us, tall and unyielding, but I felt no intimidation. I'd been through worse, and if Jonathan wanted a war, he was going to find out I didn't lose them. That night at home, I laid the day's transcripts across the kitchen table, highlighting the weak spots in their arguments. My training kicked in again. Debrief, analyze, prepare. The courtroom wasn't a battlefield in the traditional sense, but it had its own weapons, its own casualties. The phone buzzed with a new message. This time, not from Sophia, not from Jonathan, but from an unknown number. "They won't stop. Be ready for what comes next." I stared at it, my grip tightening around the phone. Whoever sent it, they were right. This was only the beginning. I set the phone down, turned off the lamp, and let the house settle into silence around me. The morning after court, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing non-stop. Notifications stacked one after another, texts, missed calls, and links. A local news outlet had picked up Jonathan's claims. The headline flashed across my screen. "Veteran's mental health in question amid family property dispute." I stared at it, jaw tight. They had done exactly what I expected, taken my service, my injuries, and twisted them into a weapon. When I stepped outside to get the paper, I noticed two reporters standing on the sidewalk. One held a camera, the other a microphone, both of them waiting like vultures. "Miss Matthews," one called out, "do you have a comment on the allegations about your PTSD?" I ignored them, but my silence didn't matter. They already had their story written. Back inside, I dialed Tom, my lawyer. He answered on the first ring. I saw it. "Don't engage with the press yet. We'll counter with evidence, not emotion." Evidence. That was the key. Jonathan wanted to play dirty in public, but courts still ran on facts. That afternoon, I met with the handwriting expert. He laid Jonathan's forged documents side by side with Dad's legitimate signatures. The difference was obvious, even to my untrained eye. "This isn't just sloppy. The expert said it's criminal. Whoever did this didn't even bother to match the stroke pattern. You'll have no problem proving fraud." I left his office with certified reports in hand, a fresh wave of energy cutting through the frustration. Jonathan thought smearing me in the press would tip the scales. He hadn't accounted for how meticulous I could be. The next blow came when Sophia showed up again, this time unannounced. She stood on the porch, arms folded, eyes rimmed red. I didn't invite her in. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she accused. "Enjoying what?" I asked. "Making me look like the fool, making Jonathan look like a criminal. Dad gave you everything, and you still have to rub my face in it." I shook my head slowly. "I'm not the one making him look like a criminal. He's doing that all by himself." Her lip trembled, but then she snapped back into anger. "You think people will side with you? They see the headlines, Linda. They see the broken veteran, the unstable soldier. That's what sticks. Then they'll also see the truth," I countered. "Forged documents, stolen assets, manipulation. You're betting on lies, and I'm betting on proof." For a moment, she looked almost unsure, but then her pride pulled her back. "You'll regret this," she muttered before storming off. I watched her leave, the weight of her words hanging heavy. It wasn't just about money anymore. She was fighting to protect the image she'd built, the life she thought she deserved, and that made her dangerous in a different way. The following week in court, we presented the forensic report. The expert testified clearly, showing the forged signatures side by side on a screen for the judge to see. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, tugging at his tie. Then came the financial expert, a former Army buddy who had gone into auditing after retirement. He explained how Dad's accounts were clean, how his investments had been legitimate and stable for decades. There is no evidence of mismanagement, he concluded firmly. In fact, this estate was prepared meticulously to avoid exactly this kind of dispute. The gallery buzzed, whispers bouncing off the walls. I could see Sophia shrinking in her seat, her confidence unraveling with every word. Jonathan, though, sat rigid, jaw tight, fury in his eyes. After court adjourned, the press swarmed again. This time the story wasn't so one-sided. Some headlines questioned the validity of the forged documents. Others hinted at Jonathan's shady financial history. The tide was shifting slowly but surely. At home that evening, I sat at the table with the reports spread out like a battle map. Each page was a weapon, each signature a bullet aimed squarely at Jonathan's lies. My phone buzzed again, another text from an unknown number. "They're losing control. Be careful." I didn't know who was sending them, but I didn't care. The warning was obvious even without words. Jonathan was cornered, and cornered men don't retreat. They lash out. I leaned back in my chair, staring at Dad's picture on the mantel. His eyes seemed to look straight through me, steady and unflinching. "I'm holding the line," I whispered. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, the hum of cicadas filling the air. Inside, the house stood firm, filled with the weight of history, the weight of battles past and present. I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for every lesson Dad had drilled into me, for the truth of who I was and for the legacy they thought they could steal, and I was ready for whatever came next. The courthouse was packed tighter than before. Word had spread about the forged documents, and the gallery was full of curious locals who wanted to see how the Matthews sisters were tearing each other apart. The hum of whispered speculation buzzed through the room until the bailiff called for silence. I sat at the defense table, papers organized in front of me, posture steady. Across the aisle, Sophia looked smaller than she ever had. Her eyes darted around the room like she was searching for an exit. Jonathan sat stiff beside her, jaw clenched, the mask of smug confidence starting to crumble. The hearing began with Jonathan's lawyer insisting once again that my mental state was compromised. He waved around a new stack of papers, claiming they were medical records, proving I'd been treated for severe psychological trauma. My attorney calmly objected. The judge allowed the records to be entered but demanded authentication. That's when Jonathan made his mistake. He swore under oath that the documents had come directly from a VA hospital. Within minutes, my attorney called our witness, a VA records officer. She confirmed that not only had those files never existed, but the formatting didn't even match their system. "This isn't just incorrect," she said firmly. "This is fabricated." The room erupted in murmurs. The judge's gavel slammed down for order, but the shift was palpable. The lie had been exposed, and everyone knew who was behind it. Jonathan's face flushed red, but he tried to double down. "She's unstable," he shouted, pointing straight at me. "You can't trust her with anything. She's dangerous." I didn't flinch. Instead, I looked straight at the judge. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, he didn't look away. My attorney rose, holding up a single photo. It was the one I'd found in my footlocker. The image of me in uniform, drenched and exhausted, pulling survivors from the floodwaters in New Orleans. Standing just behind me in the picture, half submerged in muddy water, was a young National Guard officer being dragged to safety. "Your Honor," my attorney said, "this is Captain Marcus Ellison, now Judge Ellison. My client saved his life." The courtroom froze. All eyes turned to the bench. The judge's face tightened. He removed his glasses slowly, setting them on the desk. His voice was low but carried through the silence. "That's correct. I was there. And if it weren't for Miss Matthews, I wouldn't be standing here today." The words rippled through the room like an electric current. Sophia's mouth fell open. Jonathan sat back hard in his chair, stunned. The gallery buzzed louder than ever until the judge's gavel slammed again. "This court," he said firmly, "will not tolerate lies, forged documents, or personal attacks. I know firsthand the character of the woman sitting before me, and I will judge this case based on law and truth, not slander." Oh, the weight of his words crushed the last bit of Jonathan's swagger. He slumped in his chair, muttering under his breath. Sophia stared down at her lap, hands trembling. My attorney pressed the advantage, laying out every inconsistency, every forgery, every reckless attempt Jonathan had made to twist the system. The evidence stacked higher and higher until there was no denying it. But what struck me most wasn't the victory in legal terms. It was the look on Sophia's face. Beneath the anger and shame, I saw something raw, regret. She wasn't just losing a case, she was realizing how far Jonathan had dragged her, how far she had allowed herself to go. When the hearing recessed, the reporters swarmed, shoving microphones toward me. "Linda, how does it feel to have the judge confirm your past connection? Do you think this guarantees your win?" I didn't answer. I just walked past them, steady and calm, the same way I had walked through sandstorms and firefights. Let Jonathan talk himself into a hole with the press. My job was to hold the line until the truth spoke loud enough on its own. Back inside, the judge addressed both sides with sharp clarity. "We are nearing the conclusion of this case, and let me be clear, attempts to manipulate this court further will carry severe consequences." His eyes flicked to Jonathan, who looked like he wanted to disappear. Sophia sat rigid, her hands twisting together in her lap. When she finally looked up at me, I caught the faintest whisper of the girl she used to be. The sister who once trusted me, laughed with me, leaned on me, but that girl was buried deep beneath years of resentment and bad choices. The session ended, but the atmosphere stayed charged. The gallery spilled out into the hallway, buzzing with the revelation. Some people shook my hand, others just stared like they were seeing me for the first time. I walked out into the cool evening air, breathing deeply. The courthouse loomed behind me, heavy with the battles fought inside, but for the first time since this began, I felt the tide turning in a way even Jonathan couldn't twist. At home, I set my father's letter back on the mantel and stood there for a long time, staring at his handwriting. I thought about the trust he'd placed in me, not just the legal one, but the personal one. And now, with the judge's words echoing in my ears, I knew that trust was stronger than any lie Jonathan could forge. The night fell silent around the house, but my resolve only grew louder. The courthouse steps felt steeper when we walked out that morning. Jonathan shoved past reporters, snapping at them like a cornered dog. His tie hung crooked, his face blotchy with anger, but he kept moving fast enough that Sophia had to jog to keep up. Cameras flashed, microphones chased them, and for once his cocky grin was gone. I stayed behind, letting the storm follow them instead of me. My attorney whispered, "We've got them boxed in now. Fraud, perjury, obstruction, it's all on the table." I nodded but said nothing. The war wasn't finished, not until the judge's gavel dropped for the last time. Inside the next session unraveled Jonathan piece by piece. The handwriting expert, the VA officer, the financial analyst, they lined up like soldiers in formation, each one cutting deeper into the lies. The prosecutor's office, notified by the court, began asking for copies of the evidence. The words, "criminal investigation," finally landed, and Jonathan's smirk never returned. When the judge announced that the matter was moving beyond civil proceedings, Jonathan erupted. "This is a setup. She's pulling strings. She's got everyone fooled." His voice cracked, desperate instead of confident. The bailiff stepped forward, warning him to sit down. Sophia sat frozen, her hands clutching the edge of the table. Her face was pale, eyes darting between Jonathan and the judge. She wasn't defending him anymore. She wasn't saying anything at all. By the time court adjourned, Jonathan had been ordered to surrender his passport and report for questioning with investigators. The man who had strutted in like he owned the place now slunk out under the weight of whispered laughter from the gallery. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I looked at Sophia. She walked slower, her shoulders hunched as though she were carrying the weight of all his schemes. When our eyes met across the hallway, hers filled with tears. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it again and followed Jonathan out the door. That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet Dad had once loved after a long day, but now it felt different, heavy, lonely. Winning a battle doesn't erase the wreckage left behind. The next day, Sophia showed up unannounced. Her knock was soft, hesitant, not like the sharp pounding Jonathan used. When I opened the door, she stood there without makeup, hair undone, eyes red. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated, but stepped aside. She sat at the table, fingers twisting together. "They're investigating him," she whispered. "I know," I said evenly. I didn't think it would go this far. He told me it was just paperwork, just business." Her voice cracked. "I believed him." I leaned forward. "You wanted to believe him because it was easier than admitting he was using you." She flinched like I'd slapped her. Then tears spilled over. He said, "You were unstable, that Dad didn't trust you, that if I didn't fight, I'd end up with nothing. I thought I was protecting myself." I wanted to be angry, to scream about how she'd sold me out, how she'd let Jonathan drag our family name through the mud. But looking at her now, broken, ashamed, I saw my sister again, not my enemy. "You still have a choice," I said quietly. "You can keep sinking with him, or you can stand on your own." Her shoulders shook. "I don't even know how anymore, and you start by telling the truth," I said. "In court to yourself, to everyone." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. For the first time in months, I reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. 2 days later, investigators questioned Jonathan under oath. The lies piled higher and the evidence crushed him. Sophia was called in as well. I watched her walk into the courthouse, trembling but steady, and I knew this was the moment that would define her. When she took the stand, her voice was quiet but clear. "I was wrong," she admitted. "I let myself be manipulated. Jonathan told me things that weren't true, and I chose to believe him. I regret it." The gallery gasped. Jonathan's face turned purple, his fists clenching at the table. But Sophia kept going. She admitted to signing papers she hadn't read, to letting him file documents under her name. She stopped short of calling it collusion, but the damage was done. By the time she stepped down, Jonathan's attorney looked ready to quit. Jonathan himself shouted, called her a traitor, cursed loud enough that the judge ordered him removed from the courtroom. The bailiffs escorted him out while he raged, his voice echoing down the hall. Sophia sat back in the witness chair, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The judge adjourned for the day, his tone final. "This court recognizes courage when it sees it. Miss Sophia Matthews, your testimony will be taken into consideration. Mr. Jonathan Hayes, you will face the consequences of your actions." The gavel struck, sharp and decisive. Outside, reporters swarmed, but this time, they weren't asking about me. They were chasing Jonathan's downfall, shoving microphones in Sophia's face as she clung to her purse like it was a life raft. I stepped in front of her, cutting a path through the crowd. For once, she let me lead. At home, she sat on the couch, staring at the floor. "I destroyed everything," she whispered. "No," I said, sitting beside her. "You let him destroy you for a while, but today you stopped him." She didn't answer, but she leaned against me just slightly. It was fragile, tentative, but it was something. I stared at Dad's photo on the wall, the flag folded neatly beneath it. This wasn't the ending he would have wanted for his daughters, but maybe it was the start of something different, something we'd have to build from the ruins. The final ruling came on a crisp autumn morning. The courthouse was quieter than before, stripped of the chaos and grandstanding that had filled it for weeks. Reporters still lingered on the steps, but the spectacle had burned out. This was no longer theater, it was judgment. Judge Ellison's voice was steady as he delivered the decision. "The trust established by Colonel Robert Matthews is upheld. Linda Matthews is confirmed as trustee with full authority over the estate. Evidence submitted against Jonathan Hayes, including forged documents and falsified medical records, will be forwarded to the district attorney for prosecution. Proceedings regarding criminal charges will continue separately." His gavel struck once, and with it, the weight that had pressed on my shoulders for months seemed to lift. Jonathan exploded from his chair, shouting about conspiracies and vendettas. The bailiffs moved in fast, pinning him before he could do anything stupid. The last image I saw of him in that courtroom was his face twisted in rage as they dragged him out. A man who thought he was clever enough to outsmart everyone, but ended up exposed as nothing more than a fraud. Sophia didn't move. She sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, eyes downcast. When the room emptied, she finally looked at me. There was no fight left in her, only exhaustion. Outside, the crowd pressed forward, cameras flashing, microphones shoving. My attorney spoke briefly to the press, reciting the ruling like a checklist. I didn't add anything. I just walked down the steps, Sophia a few paces behind me, both of us silent as the noise swirled around. At home, the house felt different. Not lighter, not exactly, but steadier, as if it had survived its own battle and was standing tall again. I walked through each room, touching the furniture Dad had built, the photographs lining the walls, the grooves in the wood floor. He never quite sanded out. It was more than a house. It was a record of who we were, and now it was safe. Sophia came by a few days later. She stood on the porch looking like she might turn back any second. When I opened the door, she held out a box. "These were Dad's," she said quietly. "I kept them. I think they should be here." Inside were old letters, medals, and a pocket knife I remembered him carrying everywhere. I took the box gently. "Thank you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Linda, for all of it. I let him twist me. I wanted to believe I deserved more, and I let that blind me. I studied her for a moment. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was admitting the truth. That was enough for now. You can't change what happened, I said, but you can decide what you do from here. Blank. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I don't know if I'll ever fix what I broke between us. Maybe not, I admitted, but you showed up. That's a start. She left quietly, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger toward her, just a faint glimmer of the sister I used to know. Months passed, the seasons turning the trees from green to gold to bare. The criminal case against Jonathan moved forward without me needing to be involved. The headlines turned on him now. Local businessman faces fraud charges. Forgery scheme uncovered in family estate battle. He wasn't just losing his reputation, he was losing everything he thought made him powerful. A year later, I stood in front of a crowd at the opening of the Valor Foundation. The sign above the door gleamed in the afternoon sun. The ribbon stretched across the entrance, waiting for the scissors in my hand. The foundation was built from the trust Dad had left. But it wasn't just about protecting money anymore. It was about using it for something bigger, helping women veterans, especially those left behind by a system that promised support but rarely delivered it. Reporters gathered again, but this time there was no scandal, no courtroom circus, just a story of rebuilding, of reclaiming something that mattered. Judge Ellison was there, standing in the back, hands folded. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement that our lives had crossed once in disaster and again in justice. And then, to my surprise, Sophia appeared. She didn't make a scene. She didn't push to the front. She just stood among the crowd, her arms crossed loosely, watching as I cut the ribbon. When the applause came, she even clapped, her eyes soft with something that looked almost like pride. After the ceremony, she approached cautiously. "It's good work you're doing," she said. "It's what Dad would have wanted," I replied. We stood there for a moment, not as enemies, not fully as sisters again, but as something in between, and maybe that was enough. That evening, after the crowd had gone, I walked through the new offices, running my hand along the fresh paint, the rows of desks waiting to be filled. I hung a framed photo of Dad on the wall, the same one that had sat in the house for years. Beneath it, I placed the folded flag and his letter. I stepped back, looking at it all together. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. Revenge had fueled me, kept me standing when they tried to tear me down. But this was bigger. This was about reclaiming dignity, protecting what mattered, and turning pain into something that could lift others. The house was safe. The truth was safe, and now the legacy was alive. The lights inside the Valor Foundation glowed warm as I locked the doors that night. For the first time in a long while, the house wasn't my only anchor. I had built something that could outlast me, something Dad would have been proud of. Revenge had started this fight, but justice had finished it. What Sophia and Jonathan tried to break only proved stronger in the end. Families can cut the deepest, and family drama can leave scars. But sometimes, those scars remind you why you fight in the first place. And if there's one truth I've learned from all the family revenge stories out there, it's that revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reclaiming dignity, protecting what matters, and building a future no one can steal.